Hi, this is Jeff Berry, and welcome to the Nature Calling channel, where we aim to deepen connection to the earth and to the spirit of life and to all our kin on this beautiful planet.
I met Bruce Pascoe when he was a guest speaker at a local harvest event here on the south coast of New South Wales, where I live. The event was run by SAGE, the Sustainable Agriculture and Gardeners group in this Eurobodalla region. This wasn't long after Bruce's famous book Dark Emu had been published, but it had already made significant ripples in the way we understood Aboriginal Australians and their lives before colonisation. At the talk, which was a full house, Bruce explained how he gathered evidence for Aboriginal farming from the texts of early explorers and pioneers. I thought this was ingenious. It reminded me of how we learnt so much about the pagan tribes of Europe, the dwellers of the great forest who were my ancestors, from what the Roman invaders wrote about them. Anyway, at the end of his talk, Bruce brought out a loaf of bread that had been baked with kangaroo grass flour, so I lined up to savour the delights of new knowledge as well as something I never knew I was going to taste before that. After hearing him talk, I was so impressed with Bruce's story about the crop farming he'd discovered evidence of that I asked if I could come and interview him at his home near Mallacoota, a few hours' drive south from my place. He was kind enough to have me over, make us both a lovely cup of tea, and then he pulled out some different types of grass seeds that we could admire and discuss. So first up, here's Bruce and Lyn with their ingenious benchtop grinding contraption, turning kangaroo grass seed into flour and explaining some of the intricacies of this process. So, first of all, it has to be said, the kangaroo grass seed is terribly labour intensive to crop and to mill. Let's just say this little baby is never going to become commercial. And of course, that takes us straight to the heart of the very big difference between Aboriginal life before colonisation and modern society. And the big difference I'm talking about here is time. Imagine the difference in the way time was experienced and thought about. Now, I'm a modern white Australian, first or second generation, depending on which of my parents you're talking to. And I know very well the way that modern society ticks. I've done a lot of research into this beast we call technological civilization. Short story, we're stuck in this weird weekday 9-to-5 machine thanks to the Industrial Revolution and its factory working hour conditions. Don't worry, I won't take too much of your time on this reflection. And compared to the days of the true Dickensian nightmare, when the peasantry were pulled off the land and forced into hard labour, servicing the machines that operated in the brick buildings to create profit for the ruling class, we are, of course, relatively lucky today. The labour movement pushed back and we gained the 8-hour day and weekends off. That's another story. For now, what we need to remember is that every time we rock up or log on for work at 9 a.m, we are following a machine-like model of human labour and time. No matter how you feel, no matter how nice the weather is outside, no matter how much more productive you would be if you worked when you wanted to and enjoyed that sunshine in the morning a bit more when you felt like it, you're supposed to log on at 9 a.m. Why? Because it's expected. Even if you don't, you get the picture. That's the dominant paradigm. There are exceptions to the rule, but it's generally expected you'll work certain hours according to the clock. In pre-colonisation Australia, the original peoples would have followed the seasons in an intricate dance, whereby certain activities would make sense at certain times of the year or day. much more attuned to nature and to living as an alive, intelligent people in flow with an alive, intelligent country. Gathering enough kangaroo seed for a few loaves of bread might take half a day. Milling it by hand another half until it's baked in the coals. But all that time is spent on country, communing with the land and the spirit of place, or in conversation with your kin, maybe singing and sharing stories. You don't need to create profit. You don't need to punch a card for the boss. You don't need to justify your existence. Now, I'm not painting a picture of leisurely utopia here, but working with grains as an Aboriginal Australia, it didn't necessarily matter how long things took. It wasn't a commercial enterprise. Only relatively small amounts were required. Produce could be gathered, processed, baked and shared, all in good time, in flow. Imagine having all that time to gather foods and materials for cooking, but also for weaving, making weapons and clothes such as the possum skin cloak famous along the south coast of New South Wales. And to do all these things mindfully, thoughtfully, thankfully, integrating nature and culture. As a white person, I would enjoy that much more than the disconnected, time-poor way we have of doing things today, not to mention the damage we've done to the environment in the name of increased crop yields and all the pesticides and loss of topsoil and runoff and other undesirable results of monoculture, such as the heavy use of fossil fuels. But for now, what's important is the kangaroo seed, and respecting Aboriginal peoples for being able to work with nature to create abundance over tens of thousands of years. A time scale inconceivable to modern people like us, who no longer have deep time oral memories of cultural knowledge to guide us. Here's some more footage of Bruce and Lyn. I apologise for it being out of focus. It's not quality capture, but the content is important enough for me to get over that.
So you have to harvest
Yep.
the grass, then you have to shake the chaff
Yep.
off, or actually drop the almond seed out from the chaff, from the head of the plant. Then you have to take the alm and the seed, which is attached, and you've got to break the alm off. The alm is about 3 times as long as the seed.
Yep.
We did try grinding the alm and the seed together, but it didn't really work.
Okay.
And then, because it's so rich in oil, you have to grind it as you need it, otherwise it can go rancid.
Right.
Using this method of milling. So because I'm making some bread tonight, I'm milling it.
This is fresh, straight in.
And there is a method of milling that doesn't use friction quite as much, which keeps the flour cool, keeps the seed cool, and then the oil isn't released, so then it's got longer shelf life.
Okay.
And so we're looking at commercial millers who can use that method.
Yeah.
But doing it like this is kind of semi-ridiculous in terms of labour, but it's the only way we can get enough seed to experiment with. We need to be able to make our flour, make our bread, look at all sorts of different combinations, and so even though obviously our old people didn't put this amount of time into it, they had better methods and quicker methods, but we have to, because we don't know those methods yet, we've got to do this so that we can experiment with the quality of the food, and then we can go back and say, well, the old people had a stone grinding dish and a pestle. How did they go about doing it? How can we replicate that industrially and work that way? And so we're we're going through all those systems, and it's just a learning process, ain't it? Do you want me to take over?
As they say.
Is there a way back? Even Bruce and Lyn aren't trying to resuscitate ancient crops as if they're something they're not. Bruce has made his point. Early colonisers dismissed Aboriginal farming skills because it didn't fit their preconceived notion of the savages. And those white forebears needed to believe Aboriginal peoples were less than human so that they could justify to themselves the slaughter, the dispossession, and the attempted genocide of that race. This has been going on since the first large-scale colonising societies set out to capture more land for agriculture around 10,000 years ago. It's a shame to be on the tail end of such a tragically destructive process, but it's up to us non-Aboriginal peoples to accept the truth-telling, how we came to be living on Aboriginal lands, so that we can at least try to be part of a society that shows them the respect they deserve. I've gone through this process and dealt with the guilt of being favoured by colonisation as a white person on Aboriginal country, so I'm fully aware of the genius of the traditional peoples and their way of life. I have to admit, from the outset, there was one thing I didn't love about Dark Emu. Bruce wrote about discovering Aboriginal farming as if it dispelled the notion that before this, everyone thought Aboriginal life was some kind of fortuitous wandering about, suffering under the yoke of opportunistic hunting and gathering, as if they were at the whim of nature and not in control of their fortunes like those smart farmers. He seemed to think he was evening up a score, showing that the Aboriginal Australians were just as smart as those farmers who'd learned to control their environment, to whatever extent that's possible. It kind of rubbed me up the wrong way a bit, because I'd learned a long time ago the spectacular amount of knowledge, foresight, planning, and following of nature's signals that it takes to be successful hunters and gatherers. They were incredibly intelligent, aware people, living in highly complex societies, and knew their country better than we could even imagine. Now, I know my colleague and eco-philosophical mentor Freya Matthews felt the same way, because Dark Emu came up for discussion in her book group, New Ecological Discourses, which I was in when I lived in Melbourne. And from that previous era of my working life, I'd also learnt about the fantastic Budj Bim eel traps, which were a feature of Gunditjmara life down on the west coast of Victoria. Semi-permanent settlements had also been written about by other researchers in this field, so I felt like it was pretty well known that Aboriginal life was very complex and that hunter-gatherers were highly attuned. And I was glad that Bruce was adding to that in such a concrete way, but I felt like he kind of ignored a lot of work that had gone before him. Anyway, plenty of academics roasted Bruce for this, but they can be a pretty toxic lot. So I was glad I was more soundly influenced by Freya and the ecological humanities field, who are really compassionate, generous, and even-handed in their appraisal of new information and those who present it. In summary, I was really glad I got to talk to Bruce. But even in those early days after the book became so famous, he was getting tired of the attention and admitted he'd rather go back to writing fiction and poetry. You might like to look up some of his other writings. There are plenty of his books out there. Well, hope you've enjoyed this chat. Here's to Kangaroo Seed and being respectful to the traditional owners.
Thanks for watching, and please consider liking this video. And if you want more content like this, subscribe, and the Nature Calling bell will toll for you. This is Jeff signing off.